About a year ago, I moved into a cheap apartment complex outside Chicago after my breakup. The building was old. Not charming old either. The bad kind of old. Yellow hallway lights, stained carpets, water pipes constantly rattling inside the walls. The kind of place where neighbors avoided eye contact. But rent was cheap, and at that point in my life, cheap was all I cared about. My apartment was on the 4th floor, apartment 16, directly across from apartment 14. That's where the strange guy lived. I noticed him the first night I moved in. Tall, extremely pale, probably in his late 40s. He stood outside his apartment smoking cigarettes for hours at a time without moving much. At first I figured he was just lonely or socially awkward, but after a few weeks, I realized something was seriously wrong with him. For starters, I never once saw him sleep. And I know that sounds impossible, but hear me out. I worked remote tech support back then, mostly overnight shifts. My sleep schedule was completely destroyed. Sometimes I'd be awake until 5 or 6 in the morning, no matter what time I opened my apartment door. He was there, smoking, standing silently in the hallway. 2 a.m., still there. 4 a.m., still there. 7 a.m., still there. Sometimes he'd just stare down the hallway completely motionless for so long it honestly made me uncomfortable. The weirdest part? I never saw food deliveries, never saw groceries, never saw visitors. And I never once heard his television music or even footsteps inside the apartment. It was like nobody actually lived there. One night I finally spoke to him while taking trash out. I joked, "Man, I don't think you ever sleep." He slowly looked toward me and smiled. Not friendly, just enough to show teeth. Then he quietly said, "You notice things too much." I laughed awkwardly because I genuinely didn't know how to respond to that. After that interaction, things got worse, a lot worse. I started hearing noises from apartment 14 late at night. Not normal apartment noises either. It sounded like furniture dragging slowly across the floor. Sometimes it sounded like scratching inside the walls. Other times, whispering. Low whispering from multiple voices. One night around 3 a.m., I heard something heavy slam against the wall, separating our apartments, hard enough to shake my kitchen shelves. Then complete silence. The next morning, I noticed deep scratch marks around apartment 14's door frame, like something sharp had clawed at the wood repeatedly. I almost called building management, but honestly, I didn't want involvement with whatever weirdness was happening over there. Then came the smell. Rotting mildew mixed with something metallic. The odor got stronger every day. Other tenants started complaining too. One older woman in the hallway mentioned hearing crying coming from apartment 14 at night. A week later, she suddenly moved out, didn't even say goodbye. One evening I came home from grabbing dinner and noticed apartment 14's door slightly open. Only a few inches. The hallway lights flickered overhead while that horrible smell poured from inside. I should have ignored it. Instead, I looked in. At first I couldn't see much because the apartment was almost completely dark. Then my eyes adjusted. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in plastic sheets, black stains soaked through parts of them, and hanging from the ceiling were dozens of small metal hooks. I immediately backed away from the doorway. That's when I heard breathing behind me. The man from apartment 14 was standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. I genuinely don't know how long he'd been there. He looked furious for the first time since I'd met him. Not yelling, not screaming, just silent rage. Then he started walking toward me slowly. I rushed back into my apartment and locked the door immediately. For the next several hours, he stood outside my apartment. I know because I could see his shadow under the door, completely motionless. Around midnight, I finally called the police. 2 officers arrived about 15 minutes later. I explained everything. The smell, the strange noises, the plastic-covered apartment. The officers knocked on apartment 14 several times. No answer. Eventually, they forced the door open. The second the door swung inward, one of the officers immediately covered his nose. The other drew his weapon. Then both officers disappeared inside. About 30 seconds later, I heard one of them yell, "Call for backup now." Within minutes, the entire building became chaos. More police, paramedics, crime scene investigators, residents forced outside. Apparently, apartment 14 had been empty for years. Nobody officially lived there anymore. The man I kept seeing wasn't on any lease records, according to police. The apartment contained evidence connecting him to multiple disappearances across 3 states. Nobody knows how long he'd secretly been living there. But what disturbed me most came later. One detective asked me a strange question. "Did you ever actually see him blink?" At first I laughed because it sounded ridiculous. Then I realized I couldn't remember him blinking once, not a single time. The building got shut down for investigation shortly afterward. Police never publicly released the man's identity, and they never found him. Because somehow, he escaped before officers searched the apartment fully. I still think about him sometimes, especially late at night, because every once in a while, usually around 3 a.m., I wake up convinced someone is standing silently outside my bedroom door, watching, waiting, not sleeping. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more disturbing horror stories every week. And remember, some things are better left unseen.